What's going on, everybody? This is Scott Murtha of Mysterious Planet, and this is the second episode of my monthly show called the UAP Sessions. These will air monthly on Instagram Live and will later be uploaded to YouTube. Each one of these episodes, we're going to have a special guest, and those special guests will be here to talk about a certain topic related to UAP. Today, I have a special guest, Vinnie Adams of Disclosure Team. I'm going to bring him in. We're going to talk about our favorite cases today. So I'm going to invite Vinnie into the session, and we will get started. She's joining us shortly. Vinnie is a wellspring of knowledge when it comes to UAP, so I'm very excited. Vinnie!
Yo!
How are you?
Good, brother. How are you?
Good. It's good to talk to you in person.
Absolutely.
We talk through message, but it's nice to actually talk face-to-face with you.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming on, man.
Pleasure's all mine. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I'm really excited about doing this episode because this is talking about our favorite cases in UAP, cool. And there's so many good ones. Yeah. But before we get into that, I want to just let you introduce yourself. You've been doing this for a really long time. And I was just saying right before you hopped on, you are a wellspring of knowledge when it comes to UFOs and UAP. So I'm excited because I know I'm going to learn something today. So Vinnie, can you tell me a little bit about how you got started in this and tell me about Disclosure Team?
Yeah, sure, man. I think like a lot of people who are interested in this subject, my initial spark happened when I was a kid. I was born in the late 70s, so early 80s, we had a plethora of really cool science fiction movies, and that just sparked my imagination into like the possibility of there being other life out there in the universe, and so that always stuck with me. And then through my 20s and my 30s, I was like discovering fringe subjects, shall we say, and I kind of navigated through all of them, and then finally landed on the UFO subject about, God, we're going to go back about 15 years now. And I saw it was a Richard Dolan lecture, actually, and I was like, this is crazy. And he talked about like declassified documents and stuff, and so I was like, I'm gonna have a look at this and figure something out and put the puzzle pieces together, right? And so I started like researching like hardcore late nights on my computer, digging into declassified government archives from the US, FBI, CIA, like all of the ones that are available, but then digging into the Australian files, the British files, the Brazilian files, and just trying to like I said, put a piece of like a puzzle together. And all I realized was that I was forming this giant puzzle that was just giving more questions than anything, and that, I guess it became a bit of an addiction. And then I guess the pandemic hit and I was researching. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to start throwing a few things on Instagram for me to kind of look back on, like my own little archive. But of course, other people kind of like were gravitated towards it. And so it literally just went from there. And I was like, holy cow, like I could do something with this. And I had no connection to the community, as it were. I was a solo individual in the north of England, thousands of miles away from, the US and the real history of this case. And so, I started making friends online. And so Disclosure Team just grew as a community with the followers, but also with my connections and stuff. And I guess like 5 or 6 years down the line, I just haven't stopped.
That's awesome. Well, you're doing an awesome job, man. You've been involved in a lot of things, and I think you're doing fantastic work. So keep it up. Keep it up. So we'll talk about our favorite cases today, and I know I got a couple to talk about, and we could just go back and forth and chat about them. And I'm going to learn something today from you. I know it because, like I said, you know your stuff. So do you want to start us off? Do you have a case you want to talk about?
Yeah, man, I'd like to go back to 1933 for the Magenta, Italy case, because that was on my radar before David Grush mentioned it. And so I'd looked into it. I spoke to a couple of the Italian researchers that were the original researchers of the case and looked through the documents that they got that were in Italian, but were obviously translated. And so this case was full of detail and full of data. There was actual like information on the case. Now, there was, like with a lot of cases, there were a lot of people saying that the documents weren't real and things like that.
Right.
But hold on, my light just went out. 1 second.
Good.
One sec. Sorry. There we go. Yeah. And so, but I always thought there was something to the case. A lot of it made sense to me, like the timeline and
Right.
the people involved. One sec. There we go. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah. So I think, like, for me, it was good to see a case pre Roswell as well, because like we always go back to 1947.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to kind of go back further. And obviously we can go back kind of into the ancient record and stuff like that, but it's really hard to research when you're going back a certain distance. So for me, 1933 was a really good starting point. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Ken.
And there was a crash involved in that one.
It was.
Or
It was
recovery.
a crash. Yeah, it was a crash in Magenta. The object was retrieved by the Italians. The Germans got involved, and finally, the Italians had it stored somewhere. And OSS, which was the predecessor to kind of CIA, they somehow got their hands on it. Like everything seems to go back to the US, you know.
Right.
So
I would love to know where that ended up. You know what I mean? Like, because that's a long time ago now.
Yeah.
Has it been like, stored in the same, like an underground bunker somewhere? Like, where are they keeping something for such a long period of time? Yeah, I've always been curious about that case because it does predate Roswell by a good amount of time, but not many people know about anything pre-Roswell.
No, exactly.
Like, I mean, if you're in the field, you know, then you might have heard of that case. But if you're just kind of a casual interest in the subject, probably haven't heard of Magenta.
No, for sure.
So it's definitely a really interesting one because being the first, would you say that's the first recovery?
I think it's the first recovery that we're aware of.
Right.
There may be more. You know, there are people out there like who have talked about archaeological recoveries, but obviously there's absolutely no data. It's more anecdotal than anything.
Right.
But as far as like recovery and where it went, I mean, if you look at Roswell and they talk about it being transferred to Wright Field, which obviously became Wright-Patterson, you know, it's easy to think that they would store all these things in one facility, but there's obviously a plethora of Air Force bases, and there always has been, even before the Air Force, when it was the Army Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't really know. I'd imagine at one point they probably keep these things in a similar facility, but over time we know that, or we can kind of conclude that things like Area 51 these days are probably not where they're storing things. These have moved on to new and better, more modern facilities, and so between 33 and 47, it could have been Wright Field. A lot of it is speculation, unfortunately, even though, like I said, we were working with some documentation about the event,
Mm-hmm.
which is always great. You then have to kind of speculate on certain aspects of it outside of that.
You're right. Yeah. I mean, Area 51 at this day and age is more of a trope for UAP and UFOs. I mean, maybe, again, if you believe do you believe in the Bob Lazar case?
Oh, that's a huge question. You know what? I sit kind of on the fence, and I know that's not a good place to sit, but I say that because over the years I've kind of sat on both sides of believing and not believing, and I've come to realize that it could be that we'll never really know the truth about the Bob Lazar case. But what I always say is that Bob Lazar brought this subject so far into the public zeitgeist that is a huge plus and a huge positive. So even if that is the only takeaway we ever get from that story, then I'm all for it. You know, I like Bob. I think he believes in what he's saying. You know, I've spent a lot of time with Luigi Venditelli, who's doing the Project Gravator Bob Lazar new documentary that's coming out, and you know, I've asked him a million questions about it, and he believes Bob, and I'd like it to be true, and I hope it is, and I hope one day Bob is vindicated, but I guess time will tell.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of with you on that. Like, I want to believe him.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that does.
Right.
But then again, there's no real evidence of it, and I think it's like you said. I think it has propelled, you know, the UFO stories into the public eye more. But I think, see, with him, there's a lot of stuff that he said that has come to fruition later in time, and that's kind of what traps me. Like, makes me like, oh, maybe this is real. But anyway, all that to say, because you were saying, yeah, they probably don't store to Area 51 anymore. If the Bob Lazar story is true, then that stuff was probably moved out after he started talking.
Of course, yeah. I mean, it would have gone outside. It would have gone outside of the military as well. It would have gone to private contractors. It would have been separated and spread out. So just so buried deep.
Which is crazy to me to think that private contractors kind of being in control of all this, and even more so in the know than Congress and the government. It's scary. That's a scary thought. Like, how can this company be more in the know than the people who are running the country? I don't know, man. It's crazy.
It's the money trail. You have to follow the money trail. You know, a lot of the private contractors, they'll fund politicians, but they'll fund people who, you know, if they can get their hands on this technology, here, set someone up for life financially, they're gonna, you know, I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's that kind of thing, you know.
It's insane, man. There was a case. This is one of my favorite. This is probably my favorite case of all time.
Okay.
And only because it's different than what we typically hear about in UFO cases, and that's the case in Colares, Brazil, in 1977. Colares.
Amazing.
Colares Island.
Yes.
That's my absolute favorite case, and this is one where, again, if you're just casually into UFOs, you might not have heard of this case. But this case is really interesting because this is one of the very few cases where there are stories of people being harmed physically by craft. People reporting being shot by like laser beams or some type of beams coming out of the craft. There's pictures of like people who have like burns on their skin from these craft. They reported the like cigar-shaped, I think, craft. They also reported these like black boxes, I think, like shooting lasers at them. I think, who was it that talked about the black boxes? That they called them chupas. Calm Kelleher.
Right, yeah.
He was talking about the black boxes. And to me, this case is just absolutely insane. What are your thoughts on the Colares case?
It's definitely up there with one of the most documented and studied and researched cases, you know. It wasn't just 1977. This stuff was happening like a year or so before and following that year. But I think 77 was the major flap that happened. And that's when you had the majority of the incidents with the villagers getting these burns and, you know, having the laser beam shot down on them. But this is when the military got involved as well. And so the military got involved because they were hearing about it so often. And to the point where they set up this investigation on scene. I can't remember the general or colonel's name of the Brazilian authorities, but he went out and he actually started seeing this stuff for himself, and so he was blown away and was like, okay, this is serious, like we got to do something with this. I think all in all it got covered up and it got shut down and went dark because they realized there was something to it. But yeah, I mean, it's been so well documented. There are images out there. They're not great, of course, but we are talking about 1977 photographic technology. But, you know, you mentioned Colin Kelleher there. You know, ORSAP, when the ORSAP team was first started, they went down to Brazil and researched this case as well. Now, all them files are still private, held under Bob Bigelow and Bigelow Aerospace. I'd love to see that information. But, yeah, it's a great case. And I think one thing that I will say, sorry to...
No, you're good.
One thing I will say is I think it's a prime example of when people say that UFOs are here only for good. This is a prime example of an early case where people were seriously harmed. And I think people may have even died. Don't hold me to that. I think there were a couple of people that eventually died of their burns or the radiation that they encountered. But it is an example of this isn't a good thing necessarily. So, you know, for all the love and light that or certain people may push on this subject, this doesn't like fit under that category.
Right. No, I agree. And I don't think, you know, and this is kind of going into conjecture, but I think obviously there could be different species that are visiting us, and different species could have different motives. There might be some that are love and light. I don't know. But I think there is definitely a dark side to this. And, you know, this is something that I've thought before, is what if, you know, we're mad the government covers up, you know, the UFO topic, but what if it's not covering things up because of like trying to hold like secrets and, you know, money related. What if the truth is just so incredibly dark that the government is kind of like looking after us like a parent looks after their child, and it's like, I can't tell them this. This will ruin them. And I'm not saying that's the case, but part of me always wonders, like, what if the truth is just so dark, they're just protecting us from that?
I totally buy into that. I think that's a great theory. You know, like everything in our world and our reality, and probably it propagates throughout the universe, is there is light and dark, there is good and bad, there is yin and yang, there is positive and negative. It makes sense that whatever the phenomena represents, whether it's one thing or multiple things, there is going to be a positive side to it and most likely a negative side to it, and something that's so advanced. And we hear about things. We look at the amount of abductees and people that have witnessed these individuals, these beings, these entities. We've had stories of people that have been so traumatized by the things that they've had done to them. That's not good. That's not these entities coming down to spread a message of love, or you're ruining your planet. These are invasive medical procedures, you know, and that, you know, and I find this every day online when I get people commenting on stuff that are so sure that these things are positive. Oh, they're positive, and I hate to break their bubble, but I've spoken to enough people who have experienced the phenomenon in a negative way. Some people who even have PTSD because of it. And, you know, there are people out there, unfortunately, who have taken their own life because of this kind of thing, and it's not something to mess around with. So, yes, I'd love it to all be love and light, and they come down, they save us from ourselves and all that. But like, that's just a fairy tale, in my opinion.
Right. No, I agree with that sentiment. I mean, yeah, it'd be nice if that's the way it was, but I don't think that's the reality of it. And again, it could be different species coming with different motives, but there's definitely a dark element. Like you said, people have killed themselves over this. Yeah. It's not. If it was love and light, none of that stuff would be happening. And yeah, it's a scary thought. There was something else I was going to say about that case, and it's kind of slipped my mind. But do you want to go into a case? Do you have another case for us, Vinny?
I have so many. I'm going to go on a bit of a timeline. Obviously, I'm going to hit past Roswell because that's an obvious one, even though it is always going to be one of my favorite cases. But I'm going to go into kind of 1952. The Washington Flap was great, but one for me that I think has come back into the conversation a little bit is the Kingman, Arizona crash case from 1953.
Yes.
That to me is always, it's been there on the kind of outskirts of my kind of research and that, because there's not a lot of information out there, but it comes up in conversation every few years, and then it disappears again and then comes back again. And I think it's come back recently into the conversation, but based on a few conversations I've had, I think we're going to hear a bit more about that case in the near future as well, which is very interesting. Yeah,
that's exciting, because that's, like you said, that's a case that it comes up and then it just disappears. You don't hear anything from it. Huh. All right.
I think that's important as well for following David Grush's testimony of crash retrievals and biologics. I think Kingman will turn out to be one of the most important for what he's talking about. That's my opinion.
Okay.
I'll lock it in. I'll lock it in now. We'll see further down the road. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
All right, that's exciting to hear. I'm excited about that. That sounds awesome. Yeah, because I think it came up again somewhat recently when, who was it? Someone leaked a signal message. There was a signal message that was leaked. Do you remember that, like a year ago or something?
The Chris Mellon one was that?
It was Chris Mellon. There you go.
Yeah.
So that case, that's actually the first time I heard about that case, when I saw his leak, and I was like, what the hell is this? And I started looking into it, and I was like, oh my gosh, like there's something here, there's something going on. And then it just kind of fell off. So I'm excited to hear that's gonna maybe come back into the light. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, cool. there was great research done on that case historically over the years. People involved in it in the early days, and I think people are talking privately again now. I'm not trying to spoil too much, and I hate being that guy that doesn't say too much. I just had a couple of conversations recently where I think we're going to hear some more information about it, and I think we need to as well. I think it's important.
Okay, that's awesome. That's actually really exciting. Okay, really cool. You know, when we're talking talking about how some things are dark about it and the love and light aspect. This is a really bizarre case.
Okay.
It sounds like some terrible retro sci-fi like thing, but but the impact that it had on the individual seemed to be so real, and that's the Pascagoula case.
Right.
In
Yeah.
1970.
Calvin Parker. Yeah.
So that one sounds like such horrible retro sci-fi, like these robotic looking aliens with like pincer hands. It just sounds terrible. It sounds awful. But the one guy, there were two witnesses. It was like the Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker.
That's it.
Hickson seemed to like enjoy the public eye and stuff he was the attention he was getting for it. But Parker became a recluse. He started having serious like mental health issues.
Yeah.
He couldn't hold a job. Like he fell apart after this incident. And for that to be something that happens, that tells me there might be something to this. He experienced something. You wouldn't just fall apart like that. Like his life was essentially ruined after that incident. I mean, they were fishing, right? And then they saw this craft. They felt like paralyzed. They got put into the craft, and there was some type of experimentations that were done on them. But it seriously impacted Parker.
Yeah.
They think they were both subject to a lie detector test, which I believe they passed.
Yeah.
Do you have any information on that case? Like,
well, we know that there were physical effects on their bodies as well, because there are images that were taken at the time, like a few days after they reported the incident. So we have physical images of the effects on their bodies, which is, always good to have an extra data point other than just
right.
Total testimony. That was really great. And that, again, these people that have been talking for some time, their story has never changed. There's been good research done on the case. Philip Mantle in the UK has followed and done a lot of work on this case. I always wanted to speak with Calvin Parker, and unfortunately he passed away in the last couple of years, and I never got around to that interview. But yeah, it's up there with the cases. You mentioned they're like these robotic kind of individuals. Take them out of the equation and it's a pretty normal UFO story. So we add them back in, and maybe it's just something a little bit different. I don't know. And this is the thing with the phenomena, is that we see so many different, or we hear about so many different representations of the entities involved in a case. But is that what people are seeing in their minds rather than what's in front of them physically? And this is what I always come back to with these cases, that is there literally hundreds of different individual species? Possibly. Or is it one or two phenomena that are just playing with our minds because they have that control over us? They make us see what we want to see, right, or what we can interpret, and that's where, everything kind of throws it up, these questions for me that I always come back to. So yeah, it's a fascinating case.
I love that you said that, how it could just be how we're perceiving it, because I mean, that kind of goes into like screen memories and things of that nature. But I think, yeah, because it could easily be. Have you noticed how pictures of UFOs from like decades ago, like the 1900s, how they look like you would think they would look for that time. Exactly. They look retro.
Yep.
And now the UFOs that we see in photos look like they're just silver, metallic. They look more futuristic, where they look more like, I don't want to say like steampunk, but they looked more like retro back in the day. So is it just masquerading and showing us something that kind of makes more sense to us?
Absolutely, man. Look at the 40s and 50s with the flying saucers. That moves then into kind of, blends from the 60s to the 70s. We're getting into the early triangle sightings. People are still seeing discs and stuff, but we're looking at the majority of sightings that are reported. It goes from discs to triangles, and then we're moving into the more tic-tac and a slightly more obscure and potentially modern looking things. So does the phenomena allow us to visualize something that represents our time as we are living in it right at that moment? It makes a lot of sense. I think that works for me, whether it's the truth or not. I don't know. But yeah, I love that.
Right. It's really interesting. And that also makes me think, I don't know, I posted a reel yesterday, and it was Congressman Burleson.
Right.
He was talking in an X space, and he was it was one comment that he made that just really stood out to me. And he just kind of said it. He was explaining like there's different species. This is apparently what he was told by Grush. He was saying that, you know, like there's the Nordics and there's like all these other species. He was talking about how advanced they are in comparison to us, according to Grush. And he said that he made this sentence. He said, whatever is sending the Greys is way more advanced to us, way more advanced than us. And I was thinking, I know we've heard that the Greys could be like some kind of biological robot.
Sure.
But that sentence of whatever is sending the Greys, meaning they're not coming here on their own accord. Something is, they're either biological robots being sent by whatever, or they're just like a lesser like species that's kind of been like dominated by another species, and they're just kind of like they're underlings. Like I don't know, that one passing comment like really stood out to me. I just kind of like forgot about everything else he said, and I was just like, what do you mean whatever is sending the Greys?
Right.
So all that to say, like maybe they are masquerading as certain things, but then is there an element where it is just like, if the Greys are biological robots, are their creators just like, okay, well these, like why that design? Like why is this the design you chose to send to us? Like, I don't know. It's really strange.
It is, but then, you know, again, you speak to a lot of people who, you know, experiencers who will say that they were abducted, taken on board a craft, and they have these invasive things done to them by the Greys. But then they've said that, you know, they look behind the Greys and they see taller beings, sometimes humans even, or people that look like humans. Could that be the Nordics potentially, who are the ones that have bioengineered the Greys? And sometimes there's tall Greys and small Greys. And so, you know, that does beg the question, you know, as much as like we talked about 10 minutes ago about there just being perceptions, could there actually be genuinely physical variations and hierarchy of species and things like that? Absolutely.
Right.
And that's the thing that in this subject, you can go down one pathway, but then it always brings you to another one. And there's no one set path that makes sense to kind of cover the whole big picture and the gambit of everything that we talk about. I think that's what keeps this subject so interesting and certainly keeps my head spinning.
Have you heard of any cases where what was recovered wasn't necessarily biologics, but more like robotic or mechanical or androids or anything like that?
No, not really. No. I mean, everything that I mean, there probably is. I probably just can't think of it right now. But most craft that I have I can think about right now have been either objects, you know, seamless objects that we hear about all the time, whatever the shape, but they're also that they are, sometimes the craft are talked about as biologics, you know?
Yes.
Now, there was a case that I researched, and I'm going back now at least 10 years, so I can't remember names for the case, but there was this one object that was big, like almost like a brain that pulsated and had color like flashes, and it wasn't solid, it was bulbous and kind of almost, it looked like a brain and that, and
Right.
I can't remember about it. It popped back into my head then when you sort of talked about that, but that's what seems to be more the case. The android robotics side of things, very, very few and far between.
It's interesting. It's interesting because that's something else you would think, because that's like where we are technology wise. Like we're developing robots. I got like the Tesla robots, the robots coming out. So you would think that it, like a species more advanced would have more realistic like androids or something like that.
Sure. There were a few cases back in the kind of 50s where there were abductees that talked about things being a bit more robotic and that fits in with some of the potential early MILAB military abductions that we hear about. But again, that's more anecdotal. So there's very, very little, if to no evidence for that stuff. But they were the only ones where people have talked about it being something a bit more robotic, and the craft seemed a bit more man-made because there were rivets and stuff. It didn't look as seamless and advanced as what was talked about in other conversations at the time. So yeah, there's that angle as well, because the MILAB thing is a whole nother rabbit hole.
Right. Yeah, that's another one. So what's another case you got for us, Vinny?
I'm going to quickly touch upon a case, and I always talk about this case, but I won't talk about it for too long. It's the 1956 Bentwaters Lakenheath. A lot of people will be familiar with Bentwaters because it's the joint military base from the 1980 Rendlesham Forest case.
Yeah.
But there was a very, very interesting, very well documented and data-rich case from 1956. So there's a group of military bases, Lakenheath, Bentwaters, and a couple of others in that side of England. And in 1956, the radars from all of these bases tracked these objects coming across the I guess it's the English Channel across from mainland Europe at about 4,000 miles an hour, and this is 1956. So instantly we've got radar pings and radar data. Then and this was again joint US UK Air Force base. These objects were above the bases, and so fighter pilots were sent up, and they could not catch up with these objects. They would get close to them, and the object would switch from in front of the aeroplane and jump straight behind it. So we've got pilots seeing these objects performing strange maneuvers as well. 2 data points. We've got people on the ground seeing these lights doing the same with the jets as well. So this became one of Project Blue Book's 701 cases that they could not conclude. They talk about when Project Blue Book concluded that there were thousands of cases. Final conclusion is nothing to see here. They very rarely talk about the 701 cases that they cannot explain. This was one of them. So we have these documents in the Project Blue Book archives, and they are great, pretty data rich. But because it was a joint base, the UK archives have the Royal Air Force documents as well. So when you pull all this data together from both archives, there's so much information there. And I was lucky to, a good colleague and friend of mine, Dr. David Clark in the UK, he actually managed to get interviews with the pilots 20 years ago and audio recordings. And so I have those recordings for what the pilots actually saw. And that's just incredible testimony as well. And so it's a huge case, in my opinion, but it's generally unknown.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I didn't know much about that case. I've heard of it, but I didn't really know many of the details of it. Like I didn't know what they were saying about like the radar pings and speed that they were moving. That's insane.
It's crazy. And 1956, like if that was like 2006, 2016, I'd be like, okay, still good. But this is 56, man. Like we'd only really entered the jet age at that time, really.
Right. And that's the thing. Like people say, a lot of people who don't believe in the subject being real will say, oh, it's just like top secret military craft or whatever like that. But there's no top secret military craft at that time that can do anything similar to that speed.
Definitely not.
There's no way.
Man. No, listen, dude, can I really, I'm going to have to take a bathroom break. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
I'll run.
I'll run. Go ahead. Go for it. Yeah, so that case that Vinnie was just talking about, that one is super interesting because that's not one that I've ever really known much about. I've heard of it, but I didn't know much about it. You know, what like we were talking about before that, right before we got into the case, you know, going back into where things like how these beings, whatever they are, present themselves to us. I'm curious if it really is just something where they choose how they present themselves to us, where in a way that we can maybe comprehend it. You know what I'm saying?
There we go.
I was just saying, yeah, that was quick. I was just saying, like, maybe I was going back a little bit to what we were talking about, how like different species, maybe they just kind of make themselves appear in different ways for us. Is it just like they appear to us in ways that we can understand it? Like maybe what their true physical form even is, it's like almost incomprehensible.
That's a really good point, yeah. But the thing is as well, that reminds me of a case from France, and I can't remember the year. I think it's the 1980s, where there was a family driving in a car, and they had like a sunroof, and so they could see up into the sky through the car. And it was 2 parents and a daughter, and they looked up and they saw this object in the sky, a UFO, and so they took a photo of it. And what the photo shows is completely different to what they actually witnessed, right? And so are these things not just playing with our minds, but they can completely play with, you know, photographic equipment as well? And so things like that, it's like it's almost out of comprehension. I can't quite understand that it's that simple. I think it's far beyond our knowledge and our understanding. That just shows how advanced they are.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. The whole thing of like, I know exactly what case you're talking about, and it always blows my mind to think like, I mean, think about all the screen memory cases, right? There's all these people who have like some type of experience, and like maybe they see like an owl. Like people report owls often, right?
Oh yeah.
And then they might go back to like a hypnosis session, and then like, and then, who was it? What's the owl guy's name? Mike McClelland. McClelland. So like he was talking about like doing like these sessions with these folks, and they will talk about like, oh yeah, I saw an owl, and they're describing what happened, and they're mentioning this giant owl that had boots. And it's like,
oh wow,
is it an owl? Like it has
right, right.
Think about it. And it's like things like that. It's just kind of like, and it always makes you wonder too, why an owl?
Right, yeah.
It's one of the most commonly reported things when it comes to screen memories. But it's also like a symbol, like it's like an archetypal symbol.
Yeah, it's the wise old owl, the knowledge, the wise old owl, It's funny because in the early days after I started Disclosure Team, when I did start kind of getting friends in the community, me and Max Moskowitz in Holland and Sean Rash of Witness Citizen, we formed a group, and it was called the Owls of Disclosure. It was just like this little thing that we did. It just made me think of it. Yeah, it was always, the owl thing has always been there.
It really has. The owl thing is really interesting. What do you, about the owls, what do you think about the whole screen memory thing? And like Whitley Strieber reported the same thing, right? Didn't he report like seeing owls and stuff like that?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on why the owls?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily know why owls in particular, but I can only speculate that it would be familiarity, giving us something familiar to see that would make us kind of not necessarily, because they could project, let's say they're projecting this owl thing to us, they could project the most scariest looking being imaginable from anywhere in the universe. Maybe it is that familiarity, maybe something that's here on Earth that is globally known. If you look at animal species around the world, maybe the owl is located in so many different things that it becomes that familiar thing. I mean, I'm really going out on a limb with speculation here. Do you know what I mean? It could be a spider, it could be this, but maybe the owl is just something that everyone knows. It's very visually, what it is the minute you see it. I don't know, man. It's a great question.
And maybe because it represents kind of like wisdom and a lot of stuff like that, maybe it's something that people feel would, I don't know, they'd be less spooked by.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's crazy. Let me see. I was trying to think. There was another case that I was thinking about. It was, oh God, when was it? I don't know the year of it. But oh, actually, no. Before I jump into that case, I just thought of this other thing. What do you think? This is something I wanted to ask you about, and I thought about this morning.
Okay.
What do you think about what has been said about there being a craft that's so big they had to just build a building around it? I've wanted to ask you.
I mean, let's talk about scale in what we know in our technology. We build pretty large aircraft these days and things like that. I think we're limited based on certain technological advances. We're limited on things like gravity as well. We can't build something so big because of the gravity, with the amount of fuel and propulsion that we'd need to put something like that up in the sky. So we are limited. So for me, scale when it comes to something from an advanced intelligence kind of doesn't mean that much. And so I can believe that if there is objects visiting here from a non-human intelligence, which I do, then scale means nothing. And so if we've had crash retrievals, which it seems like we've had an abundance of them, who's to say that there hasn't been one that's either crashed or landed that is so big that we have to build a building around it? That makes, I mean, I'm okay with that, and I have my own theories on where it might be. I've tried to pry that information out of Ross, but he will not. He will not talk about it. Bless him. This. I think I last spoke to Ross at Contact in the Desert, but prior to that, I'd interviewed him. And Ross on camera is Ross, and he's great. But Ross off camera, he likes to talk, and so I thought, I'm going to wait until after the interview and have a bit of banter, and I'll ask him. And he was like, no, I can't. And the one thing I will say about that as well, because he gets a lot of heat, is that I understand, source protection.
Right.
People say Ross holds the keys to disclosure because he knows where there's a giant UFO. It's definitely not that straightforward and that simple. If Ross divulged that information, we wouldn't just be going there and digging it up. I know that's not the case. That is not the case at all. So I just wanted to mention that. But yeah, I believe it. I have my theories on it. Yeah.
I have no way of knowing where it is, but I've just seen online like rumor of it being somewhere like in Asia. Is that what you've heard?
I've heard that for sure. I've heard other things as well. I don't want to. I mean, the Baghdad library. Is it the Baghdad library theory? Have you heard that
No.
one? Yeah.
What's that?
So obviously during the 2003 invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and all that that war scenario, I think was it the Baghdad Museum maybe, or the library? I forget which one. There's talk of it being underneath that because that was a vast location. I don't know. I've not looked into it that much. It was just a theory that I heard, and so after I'd heard the kind of Far Eastern kind of theories, I heard that one, and I'm like, okay, we're not getting any closer to kind of figuring this out. And people have used Google Earth and all that stuff and found these disc shapes,
Right.
and they're like, there it is. I'm like, oh, come on, man. It can't be that simple. Come on now.
No.
So, I mean, look, all it would take is for Ross's source to say, okay, you can talk about it. And we might get that. We don't know. But obviously, there are so many avenues that we can go down to get disclosure. So we shouldn't all put our eggs in one basket. And we certainly shouldn't put the heat on Ross because he may know information that we don't. And we deserve to know the truth. It's not that straightforward. So
No.
I think people need to lay off that kind of thing.
Well, that's the thing. People are so quick to jump down people's throats when anything happens. Like either someone knows something that they can't say because they're protecting their sources. And they say, oh, well, you're like, you're not really fighting for the truth because you would come out and say it. But like, it's not, it's like you said, it's not so simple. It's not as simple as that. And I think when there's other times when like people like have a misstep and then people just jump on down their throats and turn on them. And like,
it is like that. And do you know what, though? The people that scream that the loudest are the ones who've never done a single thing to try and help this subject other than sit online, whinge, moan, and complain. They've never lifted a finger. They've never tried to do anything to be a cog in this big machine like we are. We're trying to do things. And look, everyone involved in this, whether it's us, Ross, anyone, we're all human. We are going to make mistakes. It's simple. It's, it baffles me.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, I'm glad that we're just talking about this because, like, I'm not going to name people, but like people have had missteps in recent times, and it just really upsets me how people are just so quick to turn on you. It's really like disheartening to see that happen to people. So. And like you said, people a lot of people, all they do is complain and they find something to complain about. And instead of trying to actually help the subject and let's try to push this thing forward, complaining about it is only dragging us down. It's not anything. So, people just need to really look at, like everyone, like you said, we're humans. We're going to make mistakes. Like it happens. So it happens in everyone's everyday lives. But when it happens in this area, everyone's like so quick to have a fit about it. But it's crazy. Do you have any other?
I do. I'm going through a timeline here now. So we've done the 30s, we've moved up into the 50s. I'm going to move up into the 60s now, getting towards the end of the 60s, 1967. We obviously have the Malmstrom case, which a lot of people know about with Bob Salas. But a case that always kind of sat with me that I felt was really interesting was the Shag Harbor case from Canada of October the 4th, 1967. This was a case where, you've got this big open water area and lights have been seen in the sky kind of on this night by so many people. I guess you could call it a mass sighting. A lot of lights. I think 4 main lights were seen performing quite strange maneuvers. But obviously that comes down to water level. There are people on the water at that time, fishermen and things like that. So there are these big orange orbs seen over the water, seen under the water. And a lot of people think this is a plane crash, an aircraft crash. And so the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP, are called. They come out as well, and they're seeing the lights. So we've got, credible witnesses from that side. Not saying that regular fishermen are not credible, but we've got all this as well. And so they send out boats. The fishermen are going out there looking because they believe there's been an airplane crash. But what they come across is about a half a mile stretch of this very strange yellowy kind of foam across a certain area of the water where this object had, gone under. Very strange, and the people at the time were saying this was like they've been fishing there for 40 plus years. They'd never seen anything like this at all. A couple of days later, or the following days, you get the Canadian Navy go in, and they're doing deep underwater searches for wreckage of any sort. Nothing is found, and so as much as this isn't obviously an object seen metallic going into the water, this has always been a really, really I think underrated case. There has been some good research done into it, and so I think there are some good documentaries out there as well. If people don't want to go and sort of do document digging and archive looking for this kind of stuff, there are good documentaries on Shag Harbor case 1967. I think that's a really, really underrated case.
That's good. I'm going to write that down because I don't know too much about that case. So
no, I'll send you a link after as well for the documentary.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's a case that, like, again, like I've heard of it. I heard of it, but I don't really know the details of it.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing, when we're talking about like historical cases, pre-2017, when I was researching as just a researcher, all of these cases were just talked about all the time. But the minute we got 2017 Tic Tac video and everything like that, the whole subject just shifted, and it almost felt like history got a little bit left behind. And yes, there are still great people out there doing the research, talking about the cases, but it's certainly not in the kind of main conversation. And it does seem to get pushed onto the, to the wayside. And so I'm a big proponent for people going back, taking those old cases and the information and the data, bringing it back in with the modern cases post 2017, and you'll start seeing some very compelling things that match up as well.
It is really interesting. I don't even know what this was a clip from. I remember seeing a clip of some documentary, and it was in the 70s, and there was a guy from the Navy, and he was talking about seeing a craft. I can't remember if he said it saw a craft go in or come out of the water. And I thought that was interesting because I feel like it's only recently where people have been talking about transmedium.
Yeah, right.
And there's this dude from the 70s, this naval officer, talking about craft going in and out of the water.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is not, the transmedium thing has been going on for a really long time.
Yeah.
And it's only now where it's starting to get public attention, where people are starting to talk about it. It's just,
well, that's the thing, man. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll just say that again, back in those early days where it was pure research for me, USO cases were not quite as popular as aerial cases, but they were always there. And across the globe as well. These were in all the archives that I found. There was always mention of oceans, lakes, rivers, always water was always involved. And of course, once the transmedium thing came into the zeitgeist with things like, after the Nimitz, we had the Corbell cases, the other case, the cases off of the West Coast. But, if you look at Richard Dolan's first volume of 3, which he just released this year, I mean, the abundance and the time scale of USO cases is phenomenal. It's incredible work. And so, yeah, it begs the question, have we missed out on some cases over the years that just haven't been brought up into the kind of main conversation that would be just as compelling, just as data rich as well as some of the best that we know?
That's true. That's true. And I think too, with the whole transmedium aspect of it, I think it's something that, again, points to the fact that this can't just be our top secret craft. Because when you go back that far, there is no way we're making craft that seamlessly move from water to air to water.
No.
There's no way.
No.
So that's just another, to me, another point that illustrates this is not just our high tech, like secret stuff.
Yeah. And, you know, these things were getting pinged on sonar decades ago, going at incredible rates of speed, incredible knots. Yeah, that's not just advanced technology or prototypes of something when you're going back decades. No
Right.
way.
And I don't know when this was. I don't know the year of it. But I remember Lou Elizondo talking about like this huge like underwater like craft. Do you know when that was?
Which one is that? Is that the one under the helicopter that pulls the missile under, or is it the oil rig
The
one?
oil rig one.
Right, yeah. I think that was quite recent. I got a feeling that was around 2017, 2018.
That was
I could be wrong,
recent.
so don't hold me to that. But I think it's quite recent, yeah. They're talking about an object bigger than the oil. I think he calls it an oil derrick. I'm not sure what an oil derrick is. I assume it's similar to
Yeah,
an
I think
oil rig. He mentioned that on the Joe Rogan podcast when he was on that. Yeah, talking about an object bigger than the actual rig
right,
itself, moving at high rate of knots underwater, which, you know, physically with our physics is kind of impossible, really.
right.
So yeah, and it
Now I
sounds
want
like
to
there's
hear.
probably footage of this as well.
Oh yeah, he was saying that there was, which
There we
I'm
go.
curious. I would love to see that. Now I want to hear what you were just saying because I didn't know about that. The helicopter and
Oh,
like
okay.
missile.
Oh,
You gotta elaborate now.
this is a case that David Fravor talked about from someone that he knew from military service. So I think it's off of Puerto Rico. And of course, we know there's a lot of famous cases and stories from Puerto Rico. Our mutual good friend Darcy Weir did that great documentary earlier this year or last year on that with Andy Marcial. But yeah, off the coast of Puerto Rico, they would do a lot of dummy missile tests. So they'd fire these missiles up into the sky over the ocean, and they would just drop down into the ocean, and they would get a helicopter and collect the missile. So there was this one incident, and Dave Fravor knew the guy doing these missions. The helicopter comes over the ocean. There's a missile just floating there, bobbing on the water. Guy on a rope is lowered down from the helicopter over the water to latch onto the missile with a rope or whatever it is. And as the guy's approaching the water, he looks down, and this huge shadow appears under the water, coming up. A big, huge disc. We're talking, you know, a couple of 100 feet
Oh
maybe.
my God.
And the guy is like starts to panic, like, what on earth is this? And all of a sudden, the missile gets sucked underwater, and this shadow just disappears again back under the water.
What?
And the guy's like, get me up, you know, and like, get me out of here kind of thing. Yeah. So,
That's insane.
right.
That's man. I can't even imagine being the guy
Dude,
in
I'd
that.
be freaking. Oh my
Holy
goodness.
cow. The sheer size of that thing.
Right. Just this ominous shadow, like,
That
oh.
that's crazy,
And these
man.
missiles were big as well, these rockets or whatever they were. You know, we're talking, I'm going to speculate 10, 15-foot rockets. You know, these weren't like small things. And so for this thing to just suck it underwater, it just disappears. That's a lot of force, a lot of like power,
That's
you know.
crazy.
Right.
And that kind of aligns too with the weird like aspect of the UAP UFOs hanging around military bases, turning off nuclear facilities. It kind of aligns with all that. There's like a
Absolutely.
big missile. Let's just suck this thing up under the water.
Yeah.
It's really
Totally.
strange. What are your thoughts on why they turn off the missiles?
I mean, there are the age-old kind of theories of, you know, there's just a warning to us. We shouldn't be messing with this kind of technology. Now, I align with that. That makes perfect sense. You know, I don't know, man. It's weird. It seems to have been going on for so long as well, though. That's the thing. They have this military. It does. I mean, I do take that as a leading theory, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something else to it as well. I just don't know. Because look at the theories about who they are, the others are as well. If you look at it being us from the future, like the Michael Masters extratempestrial model, them coming back to warn us about messing with nukes and stuff aligns with that certain aspect. If it's an extraterrestrial biological entity completely separated from future humans, then it could be a similar message, more of a like, more of a more of a warning, you're messing up the earth kind of
Right.
thing, or maybe it's to say, why are you fighting each other with this primitive technology? You know, be more like us. I guess it's all in a very similar vein, but still there are separate theories within that main theory. So It's tough, man. It's really tough to
It's
know.
really tough to figure it out too, because then it kind of goes into like, what's your motive? Like, why are you here? Like, there's the whole, again, like, I don't think everything, maybe there's some species, but I don't think every species is about love and light. And why, like, then in one, like, you're abducting us and torturing us. Oh, but don't mess with these dangerous things. Like,
Right.
it's like mixed messages almost. Like,
It is, but then look at look at the theory of that they've been here just as long as us, as if not longer. Then if we're messing up, or we're close to messing up this planet, well, maybe we're messing up a planet that we don't actually own, like we think we do. That we're the secondary species.
right.
We're not the a. You know, what does Lou call it? Oh, I forget now. Anyway, there's that theory, but also, if we're setting out off nukes and have been for some time, and we were, I think in historically there was chances of us setting off nukes in space, or certainly in low Earth orbit. What if these affect things, or they permeate through space, that we don't realize what we're doing out there by setting off nukes here as well? Like all of those things, because it's such a primitive technology to us, because
Right.
we've only really it's in the last 70, 80 years that we kind of got into that kind of technology. It could be having effects places that we don't even consider.
That's true.
So
And when you look at the interdimensional hypothesis,
right,
setting off these nukes somehow disrupt something in between dimensions, and
exactly, man. Like, and that's what we just don't comprehend or even think about most of the time. These military bigwigs who all they care about is domination of this planet. Yeah, it's crazy.
that is crazy, man. I don't want to run too long, but I do want to, before we wrap this up,
Sure.
I want people to be able to find you on your social media and on your YouTube channel. So if you just plug yourself real quick.
Yeah, man. Obviously, disclosure team. It's like I always tell people, just search it. It's a pretty familiar black and white logo. Most people, if they're into the subject, will recognize it now. So yeah, go and find me on one, and you'll probably find me on everything else, because there's links to and from connecting all those things. But yeah, appreciate it, man.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Vinny, it was really awesome to have you. I really enjoyed talking to you
Loved
today.
it, man. I
Again,
really enjoyed it, man.
yeah, we like I said, we talk on Messenger and things like that, but like this is the first time we actually got to like have a conversation and talk in person. So, man, I'm happy that you joined me, and I'd love to have you again sometime. We should hop on again one day. But
Anytime.
thank you for joining, man. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much. I knew this was going to be a good conversation. I don't have enough of these, and I was a big proponent for Instagram Live a few years back, and I miss it, man. So I was really hyped for this, and it
Good.
did disappoint. So Scott, you keep up the good work as well, brother, man. I really appreciate everything you're doing, man. You've become a really big voice, and I know a lot of people like gravitate towards your content. So keep it up, man.
Appreciate that, Vinny. Appreciate that greatly. Thank you so much.
All right,
All
brother.
right, have a good one.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.